working experience in this legacy of love, Jew program in the children. And she currently working with the program for the
No, I'll be standing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elaine and Noah, for organizing this exciting conference. I think I have a PowerPoint. Yes, okay, there it is. Okay, and thank you to Ofer, thank you to Rebecca, thank you for everyone, for being here. So today, I will be sharing with you some thoughts about this larger project of mine, which is the writing of a biography of the socialist turned communist, Ester Frumkin, who was born Malka Lifshitz in the city of Minsk in 1880, and who died in a gulag in Karaganda in Kazakhstan in 1943. Arguably, one of the most prominent Jewish female political activists and public figures in late imperial Russia and in the early Soviet Union. And these thoughts that I want to share with you today have to do with the question of memory, gender, choices. I'm especially interested in Jewish choices that she made within the context of the new Soviet system. Now, I've been fascinated with the persona of Frumkin, not only because years ago I wrote the biography of the city in which she was born, so she was mentioned quite a bit, but also because of the way in which, through her words and deeds as a young revolutionary activist, she joined the Bund in 1901, she became a rising star on the stage of Jewish radical politics, in particular in the wake of the First Russian Revolution of 1905, and also in 1906 when she served as a journalist in St. Petersburg for the First State Duma. In general, I've been intrigued by the positions she asserted in certain circumstances, as for instance, very well known during the 1908 Chernovitz Conference for the Yiddish language, where not only did she propose the most extreme resolution on the status of Yiddish as the only national language for the Jewish people, Hebrew has the significance of a historical monument whose revival is a utopia, she said. But where at the conference, she also refused to attend the banquet that followed the conference session unless an invitation was extended also to members of the Jewish working class. What has fascinated me the most, and perhaps I feel like it hasn't been fully flashed out, is thinking about the way in which she tried to reinvent herself and her role on the Jewish street after the October Revolution, the way in which she tried to make sense of Jewish life in the Soviet Union, of Leninism, of communism, embracing it, but then who knows to what degree. So in pursuing this project, I am reminded that to truly understand the motivations, the hopes, the fears, the choices, and the self of any revolutionary and all their irreducible complexity is a task best undertaken by the biographer. So let us begin in 1922. In the fall of that year, the young communist Hersh Smolyar, who had recently moved from Poland to Soviet Ukraine to join the ranks of the revolution, met Ester Frumkin in the city of Kyiv. A former leader of the Bund, which was liquidated by the Soviets in 1921, and under the new regime, a key activist in the Yevsektia, or the Jewish section of the Communist Party, established to spread communism among the Jewish population, Frumkin had traveled to Kyiv to speak at a number of political and cultural events. Smolyar's recollections focus on Frumkin's political speeches in two spaces, one of the main city squares and the Jewish Workers' Club on Khreshchatyk Street, one of the main streets of Kyiv. In both spaces, he wrote, the presence and the words of Frumkin hit him like a thunderbolt. He was awestruck by her oratorical skills, her ability to command the spaces within which she delivered the speech and to connect with the audience, making eye contact in modifying the intensity of a voice according to the most salient moments in the speech's content. Smolyar captured the carefully crafted speech that she held in Kyiv Square in front of hundreds of workers and Jewish activists to mark the anniversary of the execution of Bundist shoemaker Hirschlecker, who was sent to the gallows for his attempt on the life of the governor of Vilna, Viktor von Hall, in 1902. Frumkin fluctuated the tone of her voice and made strategic use of dramatic pauses, he says. She began her speech in Russian, let me see, yes. With a soft voice, she spoke quietly, very quietly, and still managed to reach everyone in the large audience. Then suddenly her voice grew louder and louder, eliciting an emotional response in the audience. Some men broke down in tears, others raised their fists, and others yet shouted in approval. At the end of the speech, Frumkin first became silent, then she stared at the audience with her fiery big eyes, as if demanding silence, at which point she began to sing a revolutionary song, a widely accepted technique in the revolutionary culture of the time, used both as a propaganda tool as well as a binding device between speaker and audience. Later that same evening, Smolyar witnessed another appearance of Frumkin. It took place in the Great Hall of the Kyiv Jewish Workers' Club, which at the time was crowded with writers, activists, and workers who were engaged in loud conversation, but who fell instantly silent as soon as the tall and slender Esther, as Smolyar describes her, walked up to the podium to share her report about the role of education in the future of Jewish life, smiling and greeting everyone with open arms. Smolyar was spellbound again. Frumkin spoke as a teacher, highlighting her students, enlightening her students. And when she spoke about Yiddish education, it was as if she was reciting a long poem, the poem about the Yiddish language. Now, while Smolyar's recollections are most likely skewed by his own political and tainted by his own political views and tainted by nostalgia, he wrote these memoirs in the early 1970s, many years after the Holocaust and after Frumkin was put on trial in 1938 and died in the camp's hospital in Karaganda. They still attest to the stature and charisma of her political persona. Indeed, it is quite difficult to find similar recollections about other Jewish female political figures at that time, giving political speeches, inhabiting the political space with such ease, captivating their audiences, mostly male audiences, as Frumkin was able to. In this respect, and as a way of context and comparison, let us recall what Zionist leader Puach Rakowski said about Jewish women and political performance. She wrote her memoirs between 1940 and 1942. Quote, seldom was a woman bold enough to appear in public or take part in a discussion. Most of them were not yet liberated from the absurd notion that every man is smarter than every woman, nor were they encouraged by the dismissive response of men to the rare appearance of the women members. Even today, inside most of the so-called socialists, doesn't there stand an old reactionary Philistine in relation to women? In her short biographical essay on the life and work of Ester Frumkin, Naomi Shepard, reminds us that no woman was more admired or more hated by Jews under the first phase of Soviet rule than Ester Frumkin. No woman in Eastern Europe achieved such stature in Jewish politics. She was the best known woman in the Russian Jewish revolutionary movement, wrote Moshe Mishkinsky, one of the premier scholars of the history of the Jewish labor movement. Other memoirists referred to her as the famous Ester Frumkin. In his recent study of Yiddish revolutionaries in migration, Frank Wolf notices how, as an eminent authority in the Bund, Frumkin enjoyed the rare honor of being one of the first Bundist women to publish her personal political memoirs. which she did in 1918 and 1919 in the Bundist press. This was all the more impressive when we consider that, as Wolf noticed in his study of Bundist autography, as authors, women Bundists were almost completely marginalized, ignored. And despite their significant percentage in the active membership of the party, their life experiences and stories did not play an important role in the Bund's activist memorial literature, the Memorik, which constituted a specific genre, a form of self-reflection on history and class struggle, which had a commemorative and social function. The fact that Frumkin was the first female author of one of the three autobiographical texts produced by Bundist women before World War II confirms, of course, that she had become one of the few female authoritative political voices in the early 20th century. Eastern Europe. As with all political personas, of course, Frumkin's words and deeds were surrounded not only by praise, but by plenty of criticism, including the disparaging comments from the leader of the Russian Social Democratic Party, Lenin, who referred to her as the hysterical woman or lady from the Bund. Her former Bundist comrade in arms, Rafael Abramovich, too calls her hysterical in his memoirs. Some considered her hysterical, and she was perhaps hysterical in the broad sense of the word. If by hysterical you mean an extreme reaction, her hysteria was expressed in only one way. When she followed a certain line, she was always too extreme, too exaggerated. She went too far. Writing about the liquidation of the Yevsektia, of which Frumkin had been such a leading voice, journalist Benzion Katz, in an article published in the Warsaw Daily newspaper Heint in 1931, marked what he saw as the end of Ester Frumkin's career. The article is entitled "The Sore Bastovim," referring here to one of the authors of the supplicatory prayers, the Tchines. So the title of the article is "The Sore Bastovim of the Russian Revolution," and he seemed to argue here that she alone was responsible for the Bund siding with the Communist Party in 1919. I heard her speak then at an open meeting. She spoke with such fire. With her temperament, she swayed the opinion of so many that at the end of the meeting, there was a majority support to join the Communist Party. Most Bundist historians, in the wake of her decision to join the Communist Party in 1921, remembered Frumkin exclusively as the political traitor, and perhaps the political traitor par excellence of the Bundist cause, and purged her from the Bundist past. So how do we step back from this image of Frumkin and think about her words and her deeds without superimposing on them the love or the hate they generated? So we turn to facts. Following an illustrious career in the Bund, serving as one of its most committed and efficient propagandists, editors, and policymakers, experiencing arrest. She was arrested at least 3 times here, exiled. After the October Revolution, Frumkin does not leave the country, as others did, other socialists did, nor does she reject openly Leninism and hence face arrest, as others did. But she embraced the Bolsheviks by joining the ranks of the Communist Party in 1921. This is interesting, but I haven't translated it. But she became a beneficiary of the new state. Under the Soviets, she became an esteemed, an esteemed party activist, committed to bringing the revolution to the Jewish masses through words and deeds, besides serving as the only female member of the Central Committee of the Yevsektia. You see her there in the corner. You don't see that many women. And here as well. She was the author and editor of numerous books and publications and Yiddish, including Lenin's selected works in Yiddish, which I showed you. Well, I can say, let's just simplify and say on this one. I also wanted to mention that, she becomes a beneficiary. I want to give you a sense of this through the experience of her daughter. If in 1907, Frumkin had to face the unsettling experience of her 5-year-old daughter, Freidlin, who visited her in prison together with her mother, at the end of the 1920s, she could take pride in her daughter's graduation from the prestigious Moscow Institute of Red Professors, alongside the many party officials and leaders in sciences and culture. In her commitment to pedagogy, she helped forge the revolutionary minds of Jewish children who read her work in Yiddish. In a short book entitled Follow in Lenin's Footsteps, published in 1925, 1 year after Lenin's death, in Yiddish for young pioneers, Frumkin promoted a reverence for the Bolshevik leader in a quasi-religious fashion. She comforted the youth and reassured them that they would eventually meet Lenin again. Those, quote, those of you who do not die a heroic death prior to the victory of the working class will eventually come to Lenin's place where he rests quietly and awaits you. And you will tell him that capital has been stifled throughout the world and that over all the major cities of the world, his banner, Lenin's banner of communists, is waving. The International Soviet Republic, which he prophesies has come to pass, you will say to him, our dear devoted one, with your weapon, we have won the victory, we have won, you have won, Comrade Lenin. Frumkin also served as rector of the Communist University of the National Minorities of the West, a position which she held until 1936, and which made her deeply knowledgeable in issues pertaining to the communist parties in different countries, as she helped establish close connections to the Central Committee of the Communist Party. I have all the correspondence that she held with the members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party and members of communist parties outside of the Soviet Union. But she also served as a pedagogue, as a teacher, perhaps for some a role model of a new self. Frumkin felt personally responsible for the approximately 1,000 students, or this is what memoirs say, enrolled at the university. According to one of the language instructors there, she knew each one by name and cared about them. All this that I just, mentioned is difficult to imagine a Jewish woman playing such a leading role in public life in pre-revolutionary Moscow. If she was a benefactor of the Soviet system and climbed the Soviet ladder, she also remained actively involved in Jewish work. If some of those who had been active on the Jewish street in different Jewish socialist parties Sovietized by inaugurating an entirely new chapter in their lives, which did not include any connection with the immediate Jewish concerns they had had before the revolution, others like Frumkin remained committed to working on the Jewish street. One of her roles in this work entailed playing an active part in the anti-religious campaigns that were launched as early as 1921, following the party's decision to storm the heavens and wage a war against religion, seizing synagogues, and with them, of course, churches and mosques, liquidating religious institutions, persecuting the believers and the leaders, and forging a new Soviet self. If the success and flourishing of a communist state and Soviet society hinged on the establishment of a world and a self without religion, then the creation of a Jewish proletarian culture and self also hinged on the weakening and even disappearance of Judaism. As a prominent member of the Yevsektia, she spearheaded this struggle, which was violent and not devoid of riots and even large-scale violence. It is said, although I have not seen a document confirming this, with my own eyes that she was, they're not enjoying this, that she was among the first activists to set foot in the great choral synagogue in Minsk. She was familiar with. It was her hometown, to seize the building and turn it into a workers' club and a movie theater. Cultura. On the face of it, it seems that in her anti-religious work, she was not concerned about the Jewish response, about the fact that the onslaught on Judaism could elicit among the Jewish masses the fear of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence, and thus hinder their support for the new system. In light of the extraordinary degree of violence suffered during the Civil War, when synagogues had been extensively looted and destroyed, the attack on Jewish religious institutions and leaders could be interpreted by many as a new wave of pogroms. And indeed, there are documents, there are complaints, petitions by Jews who complained that this is a new wave of pogroms. But Frumkin had other priorities, or rather her concern was expressed differently. In 1922, she wrote one of the most ferocious pamphlets against Judaism to appear in the context of the Bolshevik assault on religion. Published in Russian in 1923, the Loy Ravinov, or Down with the Rabbis, actually appeared in 2 editions. This is the second one, more colorful. What stands out in this text is the anger, the resentment, and the fierce, violent rhetoric. While largely understudied, women's active participation in what Laura Engelstein calls the anti-authoritarian anger that was channeled against all vestiges of the Ancien Regime should not be surprising. In the new socialist state, women were not immune to rage. Zlata Litvakova, for example, sister of Moshe Litvakov, one of the major players in the communist Jewish camp, was an eager participant in the confiscation of Hebrew books preserved in the Jewish libraries across the cities and towns of Ukraine. Apparently, on one occasion, Litvakova, who had joined the Ukrainian executive committee of the Yevsektia, discovered that a Jewish library in Kharkiv was secretly hiding books in Hebrew. She flew into a rage and ordered to burn the books at once. In Down with the Rabbis, Frumkin described and celebrated what she referred to as the war of terror that took place on the Jewish street in the cities of Ukraine and Belarus between religious leaders and young Jewish communists and workers. She recorded the clashes between the activists who stormed the synagogues on the day of Yom Kippur in 1922 and the believers, she calls them the believers, who attacked them as the Soviet armed forces intervene to protect the Jewish commissars. She wrote, "We must liquidate the Cheder," the Jewish traditional elementary school, with a death sentence and destroy the clerical vermin, so the violent rhetoric in use at the time. And she reveled in describing how in different cities, the chanting of the International welcomed the death of the Cheder, and at the same time silenced the protesting voice of those who attempted to chant Hatikva, the as yet unofficial anthem of the Zionist movement. Finally, as she chronicled the arrest of Rabbi Mordechai Barishansky from Homel, who actively protested the Yevsektia's 1922 verdict endorsed by the Commissariat of Education of Belarus to close down the cheders and yeshivas, and then led an angry crowd to attack Jewish communists. So as she, chronicling his arrest and the arrest of other rabbis who had shown a rather remarkable degree of courage in resisting the Soviets, Frumkin mocks them and mocks the petitions that Jews from abroad addressed in protest to the Yevsektia and other Soviet institutions. Letters were sent to the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to Lenin himself. In Frumkin's opinion, the rabbis should be punished and sentenced to the concentration camp. Frumkin's inquisitorial zeal in carrying out this war against Judaism and its leaders was driven by a combination of factors. First, she was a committed Marxist, and as such, she believed that human civilization would thrive without religion. Second, the choices that Frumkin and so many others made under Bolshevism were also shaped by their pre-1917 experience. Promoting the destruction of bourgeois Jewish life was a way to redeem herself from a Bundist past. Moreover, the unforgiving war was a way to wash off other sins from a pre-Soviet life, including a rumored liaison with a former rabbi that predated the revolution and occurred while she was in exile in Astrakhan. Compared to the rich anti-religious literature produced in the Soviet Union during the 1920s, which was more often than not published in Yiddish in order to reach and educate the Jewish masses, such as, many articles that she wrote from early on, like for Kommunistische Fon in 1921, Down with the Rabbis addressed a Russian, namely non-Jewish audience, while enlightening the non-Jewish readers about the peculiar practices of the Jewish religion. Frumkin explained, for example, in great detail, the Kaporis ritual practiced by some Jews on the eve of Yom Kippur. She also reassured them that a ruthless civil war was taking place on the Jewish street. Frumkin actually argued that the war on the Jewish street was much more uncompromising and incisive than the one that was taking place among the Christian population against the Orthodox faith. In other words, Frumkin meant to quell the widespread notion that the Soviet state supported and protected the Jews, and that the Jewish commissars shielded Judaism. Frumkin wanted to confirm the absurdity of the claim of Jewish Bolshevism, which gained credibility in the aftermath of the Civil War. In other words, she was desperate to prove that the campaign against religion was not, as some believed, a Jewish Bolshevik attack on Christianity, and that Jewish religious institutions and leaders were not being given preferential treatment in the Soviet war against religion. Again, Ben-Zion Katz, if I can go back to him, describes this text as hysterical, again, a hysterical text, but a text written with love for the Jewish people, which is interesting. At the same time as the Frumkin nurtured some bitterness toward the religious leadership and infrastructure that survived the early 1920s. If there's a hint here, it becomes more clear in her writings later. Religious Jews and Judaism in general ultimately offered greater resistance and showed a greater ability to adapt to the regime than the Bund had. As she poignantly noted in the mid-1920s, no Jewish Socialist Party fought for its principles with as much vigor and devotion as these Jews wrapped in their prayer shawls. This remark by the former Bundist and Jewish communist leader not only conveyed the depth of her anti-religious feelings, it also acknowledged the nearly accomplished defeat of Jewish political parties compared to the fairly dynamic life that Judaism retained against all odds, definitely in the 1920s. Frumkin's attack on Judaism reminds us that while the anti-religious campaigns were sanctioned by the state from above, they also retained some specific features that depended on the biographies and initiatives and choices of those who decided to storm the heavens. If we look back at Frumkin's work on the Jewish street before the revolution, as a writer and an activist, and we consider her words and deeds, her position on Judaism in the 1920s certainly does not come as a surprise. She had voiced it clearly before, for instance, in 1910, in her writings as one of the first theoreticians of the Yiddish school movement. She articulated a radical opinion, arguing that not only was there no need for Jewish national subjects to be taught in Yiddish schools, they were inherently Jewish by virtue of their language of instruction. But she also rejected celebrating the Sabbath and Jewish holidays as part of the children's education. And she wrote, I believe that in place of the old dying Judaism, a new Judaism is sprouting up. Jewish life is creating new forms. And when I see the old dying, the Judaism of Messiah, Yom Kippur, and the Tashlich and the Kapporis rituals, I rejoice because I know that the old is obstructing the new and that the old must be overcome so that the new may flourish. But this transformation and creation of a new proletarian Jewish culture or civilization was not only the result of being modern. A modern person cannot be religious. That would be hypocritical, she wrote. Of being Marxist, of following in Lenin's steps. But of course, it was also built on the severance between nation and religion, which was possible, she believed, naturally possible among the masses, the Jewish masses of the former Pale of Settlement. In the political autobiography that appeared in 1918, entitled From Mein Tagebuch, from my diary, she recalled the months in hiding that she spent in Vienna in 1914. She was being followed by the Tsar's secret police and was on the wanted list of radicals dangerous to the regime. She had been arrested just 2 years earlier. And she was living with a Jewish family, socialists. She did not know they were Jewish. They had lost all connection to their Jewish identity. But not socialism was to blame. What was to blame, she writes, was circumscribing the idea of Jewishness to religion only, that had become widespread in Western and Central Europe. That only religion can maintain Jewishness, that only the synagogue grants the Jewish people an existence, she wrote. There was no need for Judaism. The need of religion as the end of religion, as violent as it might have been, including the sacrifice of the lives of rabbis, would not entail in any way, she thought, the end of Jewish identity, which was rooted in the Jewish folk and folkways of the former Pale of Settlement, Jews living in Ukraine and Belarus. Okay. Sometimes I find myself stuck in searching for continuities. I feel like I'm almost captive of continuities, almost in a deterministic way, conscious of the fact, however, that the possibility of successfully reinventing oneself in the new system hinged on many variables. And one of these variables was age. Frumkin was born in 1880. Frumkin's words and deeds are another reminder of the complexities, the messiness, and also the richness of the early Soviet Jewish experience that took shape within the constraints of communist ideology. It is an experience that withstands both the communalist interpretation of the Jewish past and the dispersionist one, to use the words of David Hollinger. If the first revolves exclusively around the Jews active in and committed to Jewish institutions and organizations, the latter focuses primarily on the study of those men and women of Jewish ancestry who were not necessarily involved with Jewish institutions, nor were they committed to the preservation of Jewish life and identity. the study of Soviet Jewish history in which Jews chose to or were forced to recoil from pre-existing notions of Jewish identity and continuity blurs the boundaries between the communalist and the dispersionist experience. Frumkin's words and deeds are also a reminder that we should not presuppose that there was and should be only one Ester Frumkin, an essence or core that she would and did become, a unified self encompassing the conflicting moments and choices she made in her life. The account of unity is, of course, plausible, but it may also gain its persuasiveness as the sort of story we like to tell ourselves. Thank you. I did okay with time, right? Sure. You need the microphone?
Yeah. Your conclusion is to say that Esther communism still wanted to keep. It was against total assimilation. Is that correct? Is it correct to assume that Esther was very much a communist, but at the same time she was a Jewish nationalist because she wanted to continue some sort of Jewish identity? Is that correct or not? And I think the problem, though, is what do you base it on? What do you base the new Jewish culture, which I feel has to be based on the Bible, even if you look at the Bible in a secular, literary fashion. I don't know how she felt about the Bible.
Okay, thank you. Albert, right?
Yeah.
Albert, yeah. Hi, how are you? So first of all, she wrote about the role of the Bible. Well, it goes back to Chernovitz, but she also wrote about it in 1910, this very good pamphlet on Jewish education that I'm translating, where basically, to sum it up, she says that the Bible, with the exception of a few stories, has no role in the future of Jewish education, and thus it is not an important element in preserving Jewish identity. And actually, she said that translating into Yiddish, teaching math in Yiddish is much more important for Jewish identity than translating, than teaching the Bible within the context of the Yiddish school. So, that's on one foot, the famous. This question of, universal identity versus particular identity, communist identity, the possibility of a Jewish national identity. I think that in the very beginning, when she starts to shift, to open up to the possibility of seeing something positive in the Bolshevik vision, which happens not only, with the events in Germany, this faith in world revolution, but also in the violence that she sees and she chronicles and she writes about the violence against women and children during the pogroms. So she's opening up to Bolshevism, and there is an awareness to some degree of what that entails, but only to some degree. She could not have foreseen what happened, after Lenin's death, 1924, 1925. She could not have foreseen, exactly the violence, that industrialization and collectivization entailed. So, I think she is working with the system. My sense, so I don't have an answer to that. I think it's a dialogue between communism and I'm not sure that I would call it nationalism, but a commitment to Jewish identity, to ethnic identity. And I think that she couldn't leave because she's staying, besides the family issues, she had 2 dogs, she's taking care of 2 children and so on. It wasn't easy for her to leave, but she couldn't see herself leaving, besides the Doigkeit of a Bundist, but she couldn't see herself leaving the masses that she was so close to, the Jewish people that she knew and she was close to. So I think it's a dialogue between that is taking place within herself, between communism and nationalism. I don't know. I'm moderating myself.
Thank you so much for that talk. You made mention of the 1910 pamphlet that she wrote in Yiddish, and I'm wondering if that pamphlet, which was about pedagogy for a Yiddish language Jewish elementary school and high school, if that played any role in the establishment of the Tsaushu Yiddish school system in interwar Poland, because it's interesting to me that she chose Soviet Russia and not Poland as a place to establish the Yiddish language school system.
Thank you for the question. I believe that she did. I mean, the memoirs of Ester Schneiderman, who does teach in the Tsaushu schools, she does mention the importance of this text. Why Frumkin chose? I think the Poland was not where her people were in a way, but that's. Maybe there's more to that, but that's a good question. Okay, you moderate.
Yes.
I lost track.
Thank you. Thank you, Elissa. It's very, my question is, I don't know how to formulate it, and I'll try to make it short. In my reading of Yiddish sources, time and again, I come across this idea of writers and other people, quite a hilarious idea, that it was dangerous to give too much education to women. We find it a lot in fiction, we find it in non-fiction, that it is fine to give some education, but if you cross some invisible line, it is, of course, it is hilarious. But if we think about it, forgetting about this, the hilarious side of the idea, it was really a problem for an educated woman at that time to find an avenue, to find an application. Many of them would end up as teachers. Yes, we find quite a few teachers here. Quite often we find, once again, in literature, a midwife. It became really an important role for a woman. But my impression is that some of them, from this experience of facing a brick wall, another brick wall, whatever, in this gentleman's club, yes, that they would come out from this experience carrying quite a lot of energy of, I have to destroy it. I have to fight with it. And so my question is, can you see any other examples? And in what really category can you see, because she was unique, of course, Ester Frumkin was unique, but still she was not completely unique. Yeah? There were some other people. In what category can you place her? Into the category of Rosalia Zemlячka, into the category, I don't know, of whom. The same, of course, she wasn't so prominent. You mentioned Esther Rosenthal Schneiderman, but she was completely different. Or in Žemčiūžina, or in what, or maybe into Kalantai, or in what group of women of her time can you see her matching here?
Can we combine questions?
Oh, yeah. Comments also, I want feedback.
Thank you, Elissa. I guess I'll push you a bit on something, and maybe that will be feedback. So I was listening to this carefully, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the points that you made that seems really crucial is that her campaign, her kind of in the early 20s against religion could be seen, should be seen as within the context of her fight against the conspiracy of Judeo-Bolshevism, right? So that to defend Jews against the accusation of Judeo-Bolshevism, which is very important, and your own work, but also Paul Hennebrink's work and etc., kind of makes that really clear. We need to kind of see her saying, no, like Jews are not orchestrating this campaign against Christians. We're also fighting our own, right? So that's kind of the really an interesting point, but that comes with this other question. Well, what do we do with this within kind of the way we understand the way people think about anti-Semitism, right? How kind of sort of to be somehow to protect against the impression of a Jewish plot, right? One needs to then lash out, right, at one's own. So that just seems to be, I want to kind of hear you talk about this a bit more. And the second small question, kind of going to Gennadi's literature question a little bit, since I know you know and love the novel as much as I do you think she is Tonke in Kulbak Zelmenyaner?
One more question. Anyone from this, doctoral student, doctoral science? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I was really quite fascinated by how the discourse of hysteria was leveled against Ester Frumkin. And particularly, I'm wondering if in this context, it does have a class connotation to it, because how like the discourse of hysteria entered the Russian Empire, it was very class-based. These were middle-class ladies, and it was pretty standard in medical texts. So I'm wondering if by calling her a hysterical woman, which is, you know, still used today against women politicians, but in this particular context, I'm wondering if they're calling her bourgeois or if they're sort of nodding to her past. Yeah, or does it have a component to it? Like, is that part of what they're trying to say, is that you're hysterical, therefore you're too bourgeois, you belong to the past, stuff like that?
Okay.
You can answer.
Yeah. Okay. I'll answer, you know, briefly. And then, you know, we can further discuss. I mean, Gennadi, yes, you know, who is she more akin to? Who would she be in conversation with? This is something that, you know, this is, I see a lot of frustration. She had a lot of potential, and I am not sure the extent to which, you know, she's from that generation, the extent to which she was accepted the same level. And many of these women that you mentioned at the same level with their, you know, a male comrade in arms, right? So gender plays a major role, and, you know, some of those images. And it might even be, you know, the effects, if we see the pictures, it's all men. She's really the only woman. On the Russian street, it seems to me like there are more women. I mean, they were of Jewish background, but they were. So, you know, she's trying to assert herself. She knows about her potential. And I think that plays, you know, that's an important role, but to put her in conversation with other women is an excellent, you know, idea. I'm thinking about, you know, how to write. Yeah, Sasha, you know, very good points. I mean, I'm not the first one who makes this argument. Zvi Gittleman makes this argument, and there actually Boris Bogin, who was the head of the JDC before Rosen, and but he was a correspondent for the JTA in Moscow. He interviews her. I mean, he tells us that he met with her, and that she explains, he takes issue with this, the violence, the rhetoric. What did you really need to do this? And it is crucial right now, because otherwise things will get worse for the Jews. And I need to protect, you know, and I think it is Gittleman that explained this explains this as twisted nationalism. Something that needs to, definitely, I need to, flash that out. I don't think it's the only component that helps us explain this text. The question about class is interesting, but I think it's really gender, because most of the people who are making these comments also come from middle-class background. The fact maybe that she is, intersectionality might play a role. Not only is she bourgeoisie, she's also a woman. We are bourgeoisie, but we're men, so that's okay. But so that question of class might, but it's not immediately clear to me, something to think about.
Time-wise, do we have more time or do we need to? So one more question. Please.
Thanks. Hi. This was really wonderful. She's such a fascinating figure, and you're just doing such an amazing job presenting her in all of this sort of multi-variegated fashion. I was wondering whether or not you could say a little, and this builds on something Albert and Gennady might have said as well, about the way in which this complication and nuance that you're, discovering or revealing in her might be reflected in her literary style as well. Clearly, she's such a strong writer. She's reaching people through her writing. When you're reading this work, I mean, I've read a lot about her, but I've never read any of her work in the original. Are you finding traces of some of these earlier Yiddish or Russian stylists that really, whether explicitly or implicitly, she's kind of channeling? And are they avatars for this kind of complexity that you're talking about?
Okay, thank you, Jeremy, for the question. I mean, that's an excellent question, and I don't know. But that is something that, that needs to be part of, the revealing of Ester Frumkin, right? The discussion of the literary styles and who inspired her. I'm not sure. But that's an excellent question. Thank you. Yeah. No, thank you for that. I hadn't even thought of that. I'm such a lame literary scholar. That's a great.
Thank you so much. We unfortunately do not have time for any more questions, but please join me in thanking Professor Bemporad for her incredible talk. Yes. Yeah. We're going to take about a 5-minute break here. Then we're moving on to a roundtable.